Hi there, this is Barbie Wilde, and I'm best known for playing the female Cenobite in Hellbound Hellraiser 2 and for being the writer of The Venus Complex and Voices of the Damned. You're listening to Without Your Head.
Welcome to the station of decapitation without your head. I'm Nasty Neil, and I'm joined by actor, writer, host, now director. He's modern day Renaissance man, Nicholas Vince.
that's that's really great. I like the way that sounds. Hi, Neil, I should say, but I just reading that list, it's kind of like, oh, you missed off playwright. I'm playwright as well.
Well.
It's just getting a bit silly now. It's just kind of like, I really should learn just to concentrate. Do you have the phrase in the USA, master of all trades, jack of all trades, master of none?
Yes.
Yeah. I do look at my CV every so often and think, I should just concentrate. I really should just concentrate on something, but no, it never happens.
Yeah. Along those lines, before we get into specific projects, do you see all those things as like just different forms of creativity? Do you have a preference?
It's all about storytelling. It really is all about storytelling, and I think it's just certain things are kind of lend themselves. I suppose the interesting thing is when I wrote the short stories, I kind of had the idea that one day I would like to film them. Mm-hmm. Then the opportunity came along. This is from the first volume of short stories, What Monsters Do, to dramatize them for the stage. And that was done very successfully as part of the London Horror Festival. And I hope to be going back again this year with a new project, which I can't really talk about yet because I'm still only thinking about it and talking to. I've talked to the producer of the festival, and she really likes the idea. But what I can say is that if it comes off, then I will actually be acting on stage.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and that's going to be, well, it's a couple of years since I've acted on stage. I did a thing called transcripts. But yeah, I think it is just to do with storytelling. And you can take the same story and tell it in a slightly different way, and certain things happen when you dramatize it. And one of the short stories that I was thinking of is Green Eyes from the first volume, which I dramatized, and I would love to film it, but it would just be very different because there are things you can do on stage which work beautifully when you've got an audience, particularly in a small, intimate theatre where it was done, the Etc. Theatre in North London, which is known as black box. Do you have that term?
No.
Black box theatre is basically where you have a small studio theatre, around about 60, maybe 100, and you don't expect to see much scenery. You don't have cloths, the backdrops, you don't have those or anything like that. You'll have furniture, you probably have costume, but it's all done in that. So it's kind of I think possibly call it studio theatre, where you can be very fluid in the scene changes and so on, because you don't have to move scenery around. You don't have to do anything. So it can become very fast and very fluid. And there are things you can do in that space which work really, really well on stage when you've got a live audience in front of you, but you would never dream of doing in film, because it's just a completely different experience. And film is about reality, in inverted commas. So yeah, and also it's just what takes my fancy, I guess. It's kind of like, oh, I had an idea. Is it Dory the fish in Finding Nemo? And she says, oh, a thing. That's the way my mind works.
Just again, which I guess each would have pluses and minuses, but on stage having that live feedback from the crowd as you're doing it, as opposed to a movie or short film, anything like that, where you'd make it, edit it, and then have it out before people can actually react to it. What's the difference for you as a creator between the two?
That it's interesting because, of course, it's very different as an author or playwright as opposed to being an actor. When we did the What Monsters Do on stage, I wasn't able to make the first night, because I was watching Roger Corman, being the film director, being interviewed at the British Film Institute, the BFI. And so I arrived late. I had to sit outside, and I was literally waiting outside to hear what the reaction to the plays were, and just got this wonderful round of applause at the end of it. Tremendous reaction. It's like, and then I was watching people's faces as they came out. There's that aspect of it, and then the next 2 nights, because it was only on for 3 nights, I sat in the audience, and there is just something amazing watching these wonderful actors you've rehearsed and studied and thought about your characters, bringing this thing to life, and then seeing the the audience, there. I guess because of course during the rehearsal process for theatre, you're there, and you get to see what's going on. As a director, and obviously this is the first time I've actually directed anything. The Night Whispered is my first short film as both writer and director. I happened to act in it as well because I was cheap and available. Again, it's just really interesting because, of course, I wrote the characters, but the first thing I did was one of the early things that I did was I got the cast to come round. I showed them the location we're going to be filming on, and we gave them dinner, and I sat them around the table and we did a read through, and then I just said, look, do the lines make sense? Is this what a young woman would say in this situation? And then, one of the actresses, Laura, said to me, I'm not sure that she'd do this. I don't know that the character would do this. And then we talked it through and we agreed, oh yeah, no, actually it would probably work. But it was, it's that you've got this thing in your head, and you kind of have the vision in your mind as to how it's going to look. And then you get real people involved. And they give you feedback, and then they do things, and they don't quite do what you'd originally envisaged them to do, but which is great. The happy accident in most cases. So you go through that process. So it just the answer to your question is it's just different. When you're writing a book, funny enough, obviously the only reaction you tend to get are Amazon reviews. So I did read one of the second book got a 1-star review, and I go, right. What do you mean? Why don't you like my book? Everybody else likes my book. Why don't you like my book? I then looked at the other sort of books she had read, and I thought, oh yeah, you really think this is erotica, don't you? No wonder you were disappointed. So and you get feedback at different stages. Katie, who I was interviewing on the show last night, is the director of Mindless, in which I appear, which is going to premiere in a couple of weeks. I then showed her The Night Whispered because Katie was my first AD. She really enjoyed it, but then she said, I think this shot should be longer. So again, these things are collaborative. Writing is probably the least collaborative process. If I'm just writing a short story, usually I work with an editor, so you get feedback there, and then it's published. But theatre and film are just collaborative processes. So it's not justifying your ideas, you're explaining and discussing and shaping your ideas, with a group of very creative people.
So, The Night Whispered, well, first of all, give us an idea of what the short is about.
Okay, well, it's about a group of friends who missed the last tram home, and there's Beth and Rachel and Ed, and they missed the last tram home, and then they kind of reluctantly decide that they're going to walk through the country park. It's late at night, obviously, and then this mysterious guy turns up with his dog, and he says, is it okay if I walk with you as well? And then when they're walking in the park, one of them disappears. And then that's immediately after they hear somebody whisper. And then the rest of the film is why have they disappeared and what happens to the rest of the
Yeah.
characters as well.
Hmm.
So it's not gory. I wanted to write something that was chilling, that really gave somebody goosebumps and that feeling up the back of your neck
Hmm.
and spine, rather than just trying to do gross out stuff.
Yeah.
To be honest, a lot of the reason is because that's cheaper. Because if you if you don't have to do practical effects, and I do
Uh,
prefer practical effects,
hmm.
then that's going to be that's less of a stretch to try and actually get the film made.
Hmm.
And so on. We're very close to picture lock on it at the moment. And the picture lock, for the people who don't know, is basically at the moment I'm just working with the editor, and I've got it to the stage where I'm now showing it, as I say, to Katie, Matt, who is my DOP, my director of photography. I'm waiting for feedback from him, and there'll be a couple of other people I show it to, just to get, obviously he's seen the script and know what it's about,
Hmm.
just to get their feedback. I'll try a couple of people who don't know anything, and some close friends, and get their feedback as well.
Yeah.
So that's got a very temporary soundtrack. It's got no music on it or anything. And once we've got picture lock, then we go for music and sound and the color grading. So those will be the last things to be done on it.
Mhm. Now, you mentioned all those things. Is there any process in the directing, making this short film, that you didn't foresee going into it?
Yeah, that it was going to be 0 degrees Celsius when we did it.
uh,
It's not as cold as you've got out there. Folks, we should
yeah.
just explain that obviously I'm in the UK, so
Uh,
my 0 degrees is 18 degrees above your 0 degrees,
mhm, mhm.
if not more. Oh yeah, no, it's 18 degrees Fahrenheit more. It was extremely cold. It really, really was cold. I didn't realize just how cold it was going to be. And the funnier thing enough, one of the things I thought that, as I said, I'm also in the film as well because I was cheap and available. Um, I won't do that again. I've got a definite mind that I won't do that again. I far prefer, if I'm directing film, just to stick with directing.
Mhm,
It's not that I want to do more film. I definitely want to do more film acting,
mhm.
but it is a big ask
To do
to do
both.
that and try and
Yeah.
keep your one mind acting, one mind on the directing part of it. I thought, I'd originally envisaged that we'd have chance for me to actually see the shots back, but to be honest, we were all just so cold. We were trying to get through this in one night because it was a night shoot as well. And when I say it was cold, it really was cold, and it was at night. And we were a good 10 minutes away from home. We bought tea. We knew it was going to be cold. Obviously, we watched the weather report, and we had urns of tea, which were boiling hot when they left our home. And then by the time we got them on location, they were just lukewarm. It was just so cold.
Uh,
So yeah, I think it was just that kind of practical stuff
mhm.
that just not. I mean, we planned. We really did plan. And as I say, we thought we even brought there's a dog in it as well.
Mhm.
So we brought plenty of blankets of him and his basket and so on. But he was shivering away as well. Bless his
Yeah.
little cotton socks. But he did a great job.
Was it your personal dog?
It's our personal dog. Yes,
Yeah.
it's Bertie. I knew exactly. And Dawson, who plays Ed in the movie, is a great. Bertie is a great fan of Dawson. I was saying the other day. To a friend that Bertie was great. He hit his mark every time, and Dawson just looked at me and said, "What you mean is he hits me every time." I thought, yeah, actually, that's quite true. Because we had this bit where Bertie has to run up to Dawson, and basically he just came bounding along and just cannoned into Dawson, which he did consistently because he
Mm.
loves Dawson.
Yeah.
So yeah, our Bertie is probably going to steal the film, probably.
Did the cold weather, even though it would be hard to deal with, do you think it adds anything while you're making it? Does it get people in like the right state of mind?
They all just look really, really cold. Um, I think I'll tell you one thing it does do is that it adds in certain scenes you can see the
The breath.
breath,
Yeah.
the breath frosting,
Hmm.
which really adds. I was looking at one of the shots today actually, and Katie was feeding back on one of that particular shot. The fact that you've got these clouds of breath in front of people's, it really helps sell the fact that it's cold.
Hmm.
The audience really know it is really, really cold.
Hmm.
Um, and it's, I would say that it tended to keep, I mean, one of the reasons we were filming at a country park near me. I live in South London. I live in a very residential area. One of the reasons we filmed at night was because I wanted as few members of the general public around.
Hmm.
I mean, we had permissions, but we didn't have the staff to block paths and stop people
Right.
walking, and so we weren't going to do anything like that. So I was still amazed by the number of people who managed to wander into shot, and so on. But yeah, no, I think the cold really just having that thing of the breath frosting
Hmm.
really helped.
Did anything inspire this particular story?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it came about. As you know, I do my show Chattering with Nicholas Vince
Hmm.
on a Sunday. So I've been talking to a lot of indie filmmakers in the last year, and through that, some of them have asked me to be in their movies, including Katie. Although that came by a different route, and it was, I kind of felt for a while. This is, I know all this information. I've spoken to all these great people, and I've done a guerrilla filmmakers course over a weekend, and I'm really interested in films.
Hmm.
And I'd love to write and direct a movie. And I thought, oh, yeah, I'll do it. And then a competition came up on TV in the UK called The Fear, where they were asking for 3-minute short films
Hmm.
to go in front of an audience in a cinema who would vote on how scary it was. Now, I didn't get the script. I got the script, but I just didn't get. I just couldn't get it together in time to hit the deadline. I'm really glad about that now because it's what was would have been a kind of interesting 3-minute film has become a 7-minute film. Which gives me a lot more chance to play around with some of the original ideas that I'd had.
Hmm.
And to be honest, the original inspiration is that old adage, if you're going to do a movie and you're going to do it on a very limited budget, get your mates involved. Get people you trust and like and are good at, can do these things. Use the locations that you've got. So literally it was filmed within 10-15 minute walk of my door, and we had a dog, so I thought, yeah, let's put a dog in,
Uh-huh.
because I was looking for things that would actually make it stand out in the competition as well. I was wanting to try things that, what I had in my mind was what's going to make this film stand out from all the other entries.
Hmm.
Because I suspected there'd be an awful lot of very sensibly made films where people were just doing them in houses, so you don't have to worry too much about lighting and so on. Yeah, that's kind of it is that thing of like, okay, well, what's scary? And I think the thing is, whenever I'm sitting down to write or create anything that's horror related, is the first question I ask is, well, what scares me?
Hmm.
What are my paranoias? What are my worries? What are my concerns? What keeps me awake at night? A lot of things, which I try not to think about because then I don't sleep.
Right, right. But it's just one of those things, out at night with maybe only yourself or another person around.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that thing about walking. I wanted the other thing I wanted to do with the film was I wanted these to be intelligent people.
Hmm.
I wanted them to have a good reason for walking through the country park. And so I thought, in fact, one of the lines early on in the beginning of the movie is, okay, well, how long does it take to get home to your place, Ed? Well, it's 20 minutes by the well lit country, by the well lit road, or it's 10 minutes through the dark and scary country park.
Hmm.
It's not that dark and scary. and I thought, that's a sensible conversation. You can have that. And the great thing, you're asking about it being cold. The great thing about the fact that is everyone is obviously so cold, you can think, yeah, we'll chance the
Right.
country park because what's the worst that can happen? Because it's cold and I want to get home and warm as soon as possible.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it is that thing. I mean, I don't know if I'd certainly as a kid when I was running, wanted to get home because I used to go to school 9 miles from my home, and that involved a 2 or 3 mile walk to the station, plus the train journey, and so on. And if I was getting back after drama classes, even though it was well lit streets, there were, your imagination. It's 10 o'clock at night. You're a teenager. I think sometimes it was just a way of getting me home faster, was like kind of imagine being chased by things, because that would encourage me to run and get home to the warm that much faster. So I think it's always, if it doesn't scare me, I can't really expect it to scare anybody else. And the extraordinary thing is, I've watched officially we're on the 9th cut. My editor will point out he's done an awful lot. He probably done double that numbers, but he'll do one pass and then he'll go again before he wants to show me it. I still get goosebumps every time I watch this. And in fact, I'm getting more goosebumps because the closer it gets to what it is I want. I mean, as everyone knows, I'm the biggest softie in the world, but wuss, I think, is the technical term. So I do get scared, and I get very involved in things. So that helps.
Yeah, it's really, I like that you have a blog, about the process, and I think not only is it interesting, to read your experience, but I think it would help people who want to make their own movie for the first time, and things, some things to look out for. You have advice, even some things about different apps to use. So I found all that very interesting, and hope people.
Oh, thank you. I mean, that was definitely and these are just the first 2 blogs. I'm working on another. The second one took ages to write. I realised it was over 2,500 words, which is a lot for a blog, because I was looking at screenwriting apps, and I also wanted to. Because me being me, I'm a geek guy as well. I love apps and finding, I have to find the perfect app for anything I'm doing. Which means I spend probably far too much time researching apps rather than just sitting down and writing. And that's really what I wanted to do. I wanted to share with people, because I think it's people have been very generous with me and their time. All these great filmmakers that I've spoken to, in sharing their time and what it is, and answering my questions on the show. And I wanted to kind of pass that on and what I'd learned. So I've done, the one on how it all came about, and then I've just done the one on the apps that I use for screenwriting. The next one, which I'm going to be working on this week, is about how to do a storyboard if you're not an artist and you don't have access to an artist. I found a very good previs app called Shot Pro, which I used, and I want to share with people with that, just kind of what you go through and what you think about, and so on.
I was interested. I noticed it was at the end of the last blog you wrote. It was like next about doing the storyboards without an artist or with stick figures.
Yes, yeah, that's absolutely. I mean, I can't draw for. Yeah, I have an artistic eye, but I can't really draw at all. And the idea of trying to make stick figures and trying to communicate to the cameraman what it was I was actually trying to achieve. It just, and I'd come across Shot Pro on a different project and then used it to edit a music video. A thing called We Are the Hearts by EXGF. So I spent a month in the middle of last year working on that, just because they'd asked, this French group, EXGF, had asked me if I'd like to do something with their song. And I was like, oh. And they were thinking I'd just use it as a theme tune play it on the show. And I thought, no, actually what I'd really like to do is a music video. And I'd like to animate a story. It's called Machinima. is the technical term, where you take one of these apps. I mean, you find an awful lot of them online where people, you've got the engine for, which I refer to as video games because I'm so old-fashioned, for online games and for,
Hmm.
are they still called video games? Do people call them?
I haven't played a video game since Nintendo 64, so I'm kind of out of the loop
You see,
too. But
that's more up on me, Neil, because obviously I've never played a game.
uh,
I think my nephew. Yeah, my nephew tried to teach Craig and I how to play one of these things, and I think it lasted half an hour before we just go, "What? Our thumbs don't work like yours. You're a young person. They didn't have them in
well,
my day. But you got, so Machinima is where you can take the engine, these games engines, which are available online, and people do extraordinary things. They do whole nature documentaries based for an hour long, examining all the things that are in these worlds that are created within these games and so on. So yeah, I used Shot Pro within to create that, and that's what I'm going to be writing about next, and sharing some of the videos that I created, because it was just a way of. The great thing with Shot Pro is you can actually decide on what camera lens you're using, and so on. Although it's interesting, I noticed that how I was looking at it. I was looking at, in preparation for writing the blog, I was looking at how much I'd cheated in the Shot Pro,
hmm
asking my cameraman, who I knew was going to be using a tripod and therefore fixed and might be able to pan. But it's kind of like having him walking and backwards and thinking, yeah, no, that was never really going to work in real life. But it's just a way of envisaging,
hmm
how it's going to be looked and how you're going to tell your story as a director.
hmm well, you continue to direct.
Yes, that I'm. It's all very much touchwood, cross fingers. That's really what I wanted to spend this year on. Now I'm definitely bitten by the bug. I really enjoyed the experience, and I'm hoping the people who worked with me did as well. They'll come. Some of them will come back.
uh,
Yes, absolutely. I've got there are things kind of floating around. A lot of it now is actually just about me sitting down and writing scripts. I've got a lot of treatments in my mind. I do actually have at least one script that's close to being ready to go. But again, it's a question about what can you physically do with what sort of budget, what sort of. I think that's the real thing. Is filmmaking is an expensive business.
hmm
Even the 7 minutes that we made is not cheap, and you're not going to see that money back again, because even if you get your film into festivals, you have to pay to submit to the festivals to
hmm
begin with. They really are calling cards to say, okay, I've made this really cool movie. Now give me money and I'll make another really cool movie.
uh,
I definitely want to, because I really enjoyed it. I mean, as I say, I always enjoy film acting.
hmm
I enjoy acting, full stop. But I really do want to just kind of get behind the camera now and just really do that directing thing.
so when it's out, where are people going to see it? Will it be at festivals? Will it be
Definitely be. So
online?
the way these things, this is the thing that I've been learning in the last year or so, is basically what you do is you get into festivals,
hmm
hopefully get into festivals. I know there are festivals who are interested because I've been talking about it. People are saying, oh, okay, we kind of like to have a look at it. Because obviously I've met a few people over the years
hmm
in attending festivals myself or doing guest appearances. So yes, festivals. So what you tend to do is 6 months to a year of festivals. You can now get it onto iTunes. The French, apparently, this is something I only discovered last year. The French are really fond of short films, and they screen them on TV. They tend to do it at 1 o'clock in the morning, but there is a market, so it is possible to get some money back. You won't get a lot, and you probably won't cover your original costs.
hmm
But But yeah, so the idea is that somewhere, ideally, what would happen is I'll do the film festivals and then I'll pick up some sort of distribution deal for it, just to get a little bit of the money back. It'd be really nice if I just got the budget back. But then, and if that doesn't pan out, then it will go online at some point. But this is what this is the normal way of doing things, because apart from anything else, to get a distribution deal, you need those lovely little rosettes. They allow you to add to the beginning of your movie when you do festivals, or even better if you win an award. So yeah, that's kind of the plan with it, that it will go into festivals, and then people will be able to come and see it, and I'll get to sit with an audience and possibly stand up before a film and say, "This is my work. I hope you like it. We had fun."
Now, Mindless, which you star in, that's going to be premiering at Fright Fest?
That's correct. It's premiering in it's a week on Friday.
Oh, wow.
It's Fright Fest Glasgow, which is part of the Glasgow Film Festival. It's directed by Katie Bonham, who wrote and directed it. And after we, as I said, unusually, Katie came over to my home to do the show last night. So after we'd finished doing my show last night, she said, "Do you want to see Mindless?" I thought, yeah, I would actually. I was very deliberate. I didn't want to see it until she was absolutely happy that it was going to be ready to go into festivals and do festival screenings and so on. So I'd held off. So I had literally not seen it. And we made it in August last year. And I'm a creepy bastard. I have to say that.
That's what Annabelle calls me, actually. The creepy.
That's for a different reason, Neil.
It's probably very true. Right?
I mean, it's really, because we really did do a game of I'll show you mine if you show me yours. So she showed me Mindless and I showed her The Night Whispered, and we both liked each other's film. But what to say about Mindless? It's scary, but it's also very moving. I think Katie spoke a lot on the show last night about the fact that she likes social realism. It's not. Well, I don't want to say too much about it because there's only a short film. It's very difficult to talk about short films and not give
I was thinking that myself.
Yeah, it's difficult. So I think people are really going to enjoy it, though. I think it's a really nice piece. I'm very pleased with it. Apart from the fact I slightly freaked myself out, but watching myself being quite so. Yeah, weird.
No, when she brought it to you, did she say, I have the perfect role for you? It's called Mindless?
Well, yeah, that was the big joke with Jeff Portas, who designed Pinhead from Hellraiser. Nice. Immediately put up on when we first released the post, when Katie first released the poster. Immediately, I get the comment, "Nice to know you're publishing your biography." It's a bit of a long story. It's interesting. It is actually a classic story. She actually showed me, basically, a friend of hers, Ben, had met me, said I was a nice guy, knew that Katie was looking for somebody to appear in another short film called Keepsake, which she was going to launch the Kickstarter for. And she said, "Would you like..." And Ben had just said, you should contact Nick. He's a nice guy. He I'm sure he'll like to support you. And Katie sent me her links to her previous films. One which particularly, Paper Round, which was at Fright Fest last year, which premiered at Fright Fest last year. It just blew me away. I just thought it was incredibly. Again, it's a horror film, but it's very moving. you really care about the characters, and I think that's a real thing, an amazing thing to achieve in a 7.57 minute film. And then, basically, long story short, the Kickstarter didn't succeed for Keepsake, and then she had problems with the actress that she cast, and then a day before we were supposed to shoot, the location pulled out, and it was being filmed at a house, and it was just like, this is just not going to happen. Because Katie had decided to fund it herself after the Kickstarter failed, and she was gutted. I mean, she'd worked on this for months, so she looked, and it's kind of like, okay, what am I going to do now? And she just picked herself up and she wrote a new script, which I think I liked Keepsake. I wouldn't have said I'd do it if I didn't. And I wanted to work, and as I said, I really rate Katie as a writer and director. And I think that Mindless is a stronger script and film than Keepsake would have been. So it was, that's kind of how it came about, basically. So I was already committed to Keepsake, and then she just said, okay, well, I've rewritten it, and there's a bigger part for you. Would you like to do it? I go, oh, you mean I'm starring? Oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. So, yeah, that's how that one came about.
Nice. By the way, for people, I assume everyone knows, but for people not aware, how do they find your interview with Katie on Chattering?
Oh, how they find the interview? If you go to www.nicholasvince.com and then click on the front page, it just says Chattering YouTube, and then click on that. That'll take you to my channel on YouTube. Mm-hmm. And if you just look for Nicholas Vince on YouTube, it comes up with my channel.
Yeah.
And Katie's is the most recent interview.
Yeah, very cool. And it's live on Sundays, so people in the future.
It's live on Sundays. Yes. I think one of the things I really enjoy about the show is that we managed to, because I insist on doing it live on a Sunday evening, with people who sometimes I haven't properly met, and who are new to the technology, which always amps up the the nerves immediately beforehand for both the guest and me. But it does mean we can get some sort of interaction. It does mean that people can ask questions live, and because I use a technology called Google Hangouts, then I can usually manage to get about 2 or 3 people on live to actually say hello to the person in person, and just ask their question and do a little bit of a hangout with them.
Very cool. I don't have a webcam on my computer, but I need to get one so I can make an appearance.
Yeah, you should. We talked about this. You should look into this. It's Google. Therefore, things change. It's like I've been doing this now for nearly 2 years. Actually, it must be coming up for 2 years fairly soon.
Wow.
Somebody had to point out to me I'd been doing it a year last year. I'm not big on anniversaries. I managed to do my birthday and Craig's, and the dog. I know when the dog arrived, and I can, but I'm just not very good with anniversaries and birthdays. Otherwise,
I'm bad with dates in general. So.
It's kind of like, just unless it's in my calendar and I get a nice little reminder to tell me what it is I'm doing. There's a good chance it won't happen.
So also want to let everyone know it's facebook.com/The Night Whispered. Everyone should give it a like, and you can also follow what's going on.
Yes, absolutely. Yes, and it's yes, and you're absolutely right. There's the page to like. So okay, I was hesitating because I was suddenly realizing, I was thinking earlier on today, I've made a group. I didn't mean to make a group. I suddenly realized the group is actually the people who are actually the production group, rather than the main like page. Go follow the like page. That's it. There's also a newsletter. People can sign up for a newsletter for The Night Whispered as well, but you do that via my website.
Very cool, very cool. Now, we're going to talk another project. Before I get to that, though, I do need to bring up, because I found out about it on the Night Whispered page, and this is absolutely amazing, and it is I Rip Your Jugular. It's a fake trailer, and I absolutely love this, and if this would ever become a feature or a short film on its own, I would love to see it.
That was probably one of the most fun days I had last year.
Uh,
It was quite extraordinary. This is all from the guys who did, well, they did the Hellraiser
hmm
documentary, Leviathan. And Gary Smart and Chris Griffiths
hmm
were on the show talking recently about this. And having that was such a big success. That then led them to being in touch with Tom Holland, who wrote and directed. Wrote. Did he direct as well? But Fright Night.
hmm
Tom Holland, who did Fright Night and Child's Play. And they done some amazing interviews with that, and basically the same as they did with Leviathan, but obviously they've learned more, and I think, and so on.
hmm
And then, as part of their Kickstarter, they suddenly said, "Would you?" They put this thing up, and they told me they were going to do it. And I just thought, "Are you sure?" They said, "Would you like to have DVD extras of Nick and Simon Bamford recreating the films that are referred to for Peter Vincent?" And Simon, now they'd already set up that Simon and Simon Bamford, Butterball and Hellraiser, they'd already got him to do the Kickstarter promo video playing Roddy McDowall playing Peter
Yeah,
Vincent.
which he does perfectly.
It's absolutely, it's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah, it's great.
I keep on singing his praises for this because I just think it's absolutely uncanny.
hmm
And the one of the reasons it's uncanny is because Stuart Conran, who was a makeup runner on Hellraiser, he was a teenager when he did Hellraiser, came and did the makeup for Simon. It's great. I mean, it was really weird because there's times when I was looking at Simon on set when we were filming, and basically what we did was we filmed these mock trailers. I
hmm
think we did 4 of them in a day. And it's great. I mean, I was standing next to Simon and looking at him, thinking, "This is Roddy McDowall." I feel as if I'm standing next to Roddy
yeah,
McDowall
and
because just extraordinary.
hmm and
The
not just the
make
yeah, and just not just the makeup, but he's got the mannerisms down, and
he's
it's
got the
just
voice.
yeah, it's everything about. It's like wow, this is just perfect. Because Fright Night's actually one of my favorite horror movies since I was a kid, and he really nailed it. I was like, wow, this is great.
Oh yeah, he's absolutely extraordinary, and I think, and we were also lucky as well. The group of guys that they brought in to do the acting as well, and the gentleman who's doing the editing is a gentleman called Eastwood Allen, obviously affectionately referred to as Clint, and Eastwood Allen. Google that name and look for his documentary that he'd done previously on a musician who I have no idea because I really don't follow these things. But have a look at the work that Eastwood did on that, and then you look at the trailer that has gone online. Now he's done an amazing job with that, and Eastwood's editing the documentary as well. But we had so much fun. Although I have to say I was slightly miffed because basically Simon had Stuart Conran doing the makeup and had this beautiful silicone makeup and a
Uh,
wig, and and Stuart. Me, I just got the Halloween costumes, the most ridiculous wigs, the fangs that moved around in my mouth, and I mean, it really is just. And I can't remember the name of the gentleman, Neil, I think, who wrote, another Neil who wrote the scripts for. They're really, really well done,
mhm.
these trailers, and I can't wait to see the other 3.
Yeah,
The guys, which are going to be available on they're releasing this one that I put on Night Whispered, but they're holding back 3 for the actual DVD.
mhm.
But I think the documentary is actually officially titled "You're So Cool, Brewster,"
Yes.
the classic line from that movie.
Um,
But yeah, yeah.
You're so cool, Brewster.
That's great. That's really good. Stephen Jeffries. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. He's a nice man. I met him once very briefly at a convention.
Yeah, he's very cool. I was very because it is a movie I've always enjoyed, and I was very happy I got to host a panel for it at Days of the Dead, and it was basically the whole cast, obviously except for Peter Vincent. But
Yeah, for Roddy. Yeah.
yeah, but and I didn't ask him to do the line, and afterwards he thanked me. He's like, "Thanks for not asking me to do the line," because apparently he doesn't like doing the line anymore because everyone is
No,
asking.
I think they actually have a clip
Uh,
saying, "Okay, this is the very last time I will ever do this," as part of the documentary. I think the interesting thing, I love Fright Night as well.
mhm,
In fact, I did a original versus remake show on Fright Night on the Chattering with Nicholas Finch show.
mhm,
Um, I, it's that thing we were talking about moving. I mean, spoiler alert, but for anybody who's not seen the original Fright Night, please go out and watch it. But I will give it, this is a spoiler alert. We're talking about Evil Ed. Is that
mhm.
the character
Yeah,
name?
Evil Ed. Yep.
Yeah, Evil Ed. His death is probably one of the most moving things.
Definitely. Yeah. You
It, you
feel
know,
really
just
bad for him. Hmm.
you know, and it's moving because of him, but also Roddy McDowall
Hmm.
is just. I mean, Roddy McDowall's performance in Fright Night is wonderful. They all are. I think there isn't a bum note in that movie.
Hmm.
Um, but it is that thing of horror. You really want to care about the people for it to be horrific.
Hmm.
And horror isn't just about slashing people's throats and killing them in more vaingloriously silly ways.
Hmm.
I watched Nightmare on Elm Street again the other day, and I was terrified by that movie
Hmm.
when I first saw it in the cinema. I mean, we're talking about that thing of not being able to walk home alone in the dark. And I remember walking home in the dark with a young lady who'd been at the cinema that evening. We happened to live close by. We were school friends, and we were walking home, and we suddenly realized as I walked underneath a lamp that the shadow I was casting, I was wearing a fedora
Mm.
hat and a big baggy jumper.
Uh-huh.
So it's just a perfect Freddy shadow coming.
That's pretty
I think we
wild.
really did run home.
Yeah.
And at that stage, I was probably in my early 20s. I
Mm.
tell you, I really am a wuss. But I think the thing about Nightmare on the White so is because okay, yeah, you have these ridiculous deaths. Johnny Depp's death
Yeah,
in
with just
Nightmare. It's
the fountain of
just,
blood. Yeah, right.
it's just hilarious.
Uh,
I remember watching it and going, okay, guys, you lost me on this one.
uh-huh.
But it's that whole concept of you can't escape the monster because the monster's in your dreams.
Hmm.
And not only is the monster in your dreams, where we often encounter monsters in nightmares, he's going to kill you. And he can kill you in your dream. And that is such a mind fuck. Um, but yeah, no, I think going back to Yossa Kulbrewster and Fright Night, it's an extraordinary film. It really is a great film.
Yeah. There's also the scene when Evil Ed is turned. I think is very emotional because you can understand why he's doing it, and it's also the vampires like taking advantage of this guy's wanting to fit in, and it's just a really great scene.
Yeah, no, I'm so it's that thing of loneliness, isn't
Hmm.
it? It really is that thing of teenage loneliness, and also when you're the outsider, um, when you're the weird guy at school. I think I probably identified that a lot when I saw the movie the first time. Um, that yeah, you yes, it is playing on that vulnerability and offering him some, and he's basically Jerry Dandridge is grooming him
Hmm.
in a paedophile. That's exactly what's going on there.
Hmm.
Yeah, it really is a good movie.
Yeah,
It
and
really is a very, very good
I
movie.
think a lot of people think of Scream as the first like movie where it's like kind of self-referential to like horror movies, but I always thought really Fright Night is because they know that it's a vampire, and they reference other vampire movies and how to kill them and all these things. So I always found that aspect of the movie really
Yeah,
original.
that's a very good point. No, you're absolutely right. Yes, because it really is. So, what do you do if you believe that your neighbor is a vampire?
Hmm.
And they were, and also it is that great thing of all the a Fright Night, the Peter Vincent TV show, um, and the rubber bats and
Yeah.
and so on.
Yeah.
It's very interesting, very good.
And by the way, even though you might have had the cheap props for your, I think it came out perfect in the
Oh,
video.
thank you very much.
Uh,
Thank you.
I thought it was perfect, and honestly, the fun that you guys are having really is clear. It's like right there, and it really makes the video.
Oh, thank you, thank you. Well, there is even more over the top acting.
uh,
Werewolf of Moldavia. I just really went for it, and and also this. But what's really nice is that the four trailers kind of chart Peter Vincent's career up to the point of Fright Night.
mhm.
The guys were very specific and very clever about this. That Gary Smart was telling us that basically it's different stages of Peter's career, including the psychedelic Italian movie as one. And I've seen some rough cuts of the trailers, and I'm giggling now just thinking about them.
I haven't seen them at all, and it
No,
makes me
no, you're
happy.
not
So
going to unless you get the DVD.
yeah, yeah. Perhaps one of them could be the machete of our time. It'll go on.
Oh,
So. But another project that's out is Marvel Frontiers Comics, and it's like a graphic novel with there's several short stories in it, and one of them is a well, not short stories, they were like 4 issue runs of comics, and one of them is Mortigan Goth Immortalis, which you wrote, and give people an idea of what this one was about, and when did it come out
Um,
originally?
it's the 1980s. Actually, no, it's. I was looking at this earlier on to see if I can try it. Is 91 or 90,
Yeah, I think
something
it was
like
early
that.
'90s. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's 91 when actually they did this. So basically, what this is, it collects. Try and keep this as brief as possible. Basically, what happened was that I was writing comics at that time because I was working on the Epic comics for Marvel in the US, the Hellraiser title and the Nightbreed title. But I'd also written for a comic called Crisis in the UK. And these things had sprung, and Crisis had sprung out of the fact that Watchmen, Alan Moore's Watchmen,
Hmm.
was such a kind of a big breakout success for the this term of graphic novel
Hmm.
was kind of coined around about then, and this idea that you could actually that comics weren't just either for kids,
Hmm.
My Little Pony comic, or based on things like Doctor Who, aimed at boys, or they were superheroes being aimed at boys. And also it's more than just geeks who are, forgive me for using the phrase, and that actually these were aimed at mature readers. Um, it's so I was writing at the same time as we were kind of writing, and there was just a whole group of us at Marvel UK, which was obviously part of Move Marvel. It was just their UK offices. The fun thing was that are you familiar with the phrase the bullpen?
No.
In Marvel, and basically in Marvel, what they did in the Marvel, they put all their artists in the Marvel offices in the bullpen. So they had they had a lot of their artists actually sitting in the middle of the offices in what was referred to as the bullpen. And I think Stanley refers to them in the letters that he used to introduce in some of the fresh from the bullpen, here is artwork by. And they recreated that. So they brought in some of the artists, 2 or 3 of them. They had much smaller. It was obviously a much smaller affair. And we were doing mainstream. I also wrote for Marvel UK a thing called Warheads, which was your month. Well, It was monthly comic in the USA because that's what the USA does. 24-page monthly comic. In the UK, because we do weekly comics, there were 6 pages. So 4 sixes are 24,
Yeah.
which makes up your monthly. So I was writing warheads, and every 6 pages there had to be a cliffhanger. And it was really quite fascinating technical process. So we're doing those. And then at the same time, a gentleman known then as Michael Bennett, but now known as Michael Weissmuller. His original family name is Weissmuller, as in Johnny Weissmuller.
No, no.
Yeah, it is
Tarzan?
related
Yeah.
to Johnny Weissmuller. He was editing Crisis for a different publisher, and then got brought into Marvel UK to run their Frontier and their more, as I say, the graphic novel adult mature reader. There's an awful lot of boobs in this. In one of the stories at the end, Liam Sharp, beautiful statuesque naked women in one of the stories at the back. But so Mortigan Goth Immortalis, basically we wrote, there was a bunch of us who were already working for Marvel UK, asked if we would like to do 4-issue limited runs. And I chose, the idea was, I immediately thought of writing an immortal character, because I find them fascinating. And also kind of they're slightly disappointing in many ways. Most of the immortal, Dracula gets killed very easily. Sunlight, that's it. That's him gone. Okay, you can sweep him up a dustpan and brush and then add blood and he comes back again. But, immortals tend not to be actually very immortal in literature. So I really like the idea. And there are a number of... I mean, the great thing with the Marvel Universe is that you have these great characters. They quite happily plunder... They borrow from literature. So I think Faustus is actually a Marvel character. So the whole idea is Mortigan Goth Immortalis. I think it was Michael's idea that we had the word goth because he thought it was very gothic. That was kind of like part of the look and so on.
Yeah, was it before that was like a used term, just like calling people goth?
Oh yeah.
Uh-huh.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. We had goths back in the 1980s. I have no idea when goths. Well, it's obviously after the Victorian times because that's where they're all basing their style. I guess the 1960s. The goths coming. That's a Wikipedia entry to look up.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we had back in the 1980s, 90s, we had goths. Bless them. I love goths. And yeah, so I Mortigan because it sounded like mortician. And I like that percussiveness of Mortigan, goth, and Immortalis is obviously the Latin for immortal, and just the idea, and I got to write Stephen Strange, Doctor Strange, who is my favorite character, Marvel comics. When I could get hold of them, which I couldn't really very much as a kid, but Dr. Stephen Strange was always one of the characters that I was really interested in.
Yeah, which my brother just had a birthday in December, and for his birthday he actually got a Doctor Strange tattoo because that was his favorite character.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And so I read this comic and I absolutely loved it. I was not familiar with any of these in before getting the graphic novel, and not just because you're on the show. I loved this right from the start, and I read the whole thing. And I was like, wow, this is great, like an epic tale. And so I texted my brother because he grew up huge comic book reader, and I was like, "Have you ever heard of this?" And I explained who's in it, and he's like, "Oh yeah, it's great." And I was like, "Oh well, Nicholas actually, I wrote that. We have on the show several times, and he was not aware, and it was very cool."
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you. I'm glad you enjoyed it. It's one of those things that every so often somebody will come up to me at a convention and either mention the Warheads comic or an occasionally Mortigan Goth. I mean, they didn't do badly. They didn't do enough to be financially viable. So, as it says in the collection, these are all the ones that they have gathered all the stories that we did. Funnily enough, there are some short stories in there as well, which I also wrote. But yeah, thank you. It's a fun piece. It's very strange looking at your own work 20 years later. I was dreading it. I remembered that I wasn't happy with the last episode, or the last issue, and I thought, I'm not sure. I remember I turned it in late. I thought, actually, I really like it. I look at it again now, and I just think, I really like this. It's a fun thing, and I think it is that thing of the other thing. And of course, I managed to write a ghost in it as well. I wanted to write a humorous ghost. Because I think you're going to have, if you've got somebody who's an immortal, they need a sidekick. And somebody who's immortal is probably going to be fairly miserable and probably, not got a lot of humor about them, because that probably disappeared after the first 50 or 60 years of being immortal. And I think it doesn't mean that Mortigan's not a good man. I think hopefully that comes across in the comic. He does his best to be good. But I really wanted the idea of having a ghost, and I really like. And again, just looking at that first episode, the introduction to the ghost and the introduction of Tone, I was really pleased with that and the way it worked.
Just the whole setup to the characters and Mephisto in it, and the chess game was great. And reading like your intro and then seeing all the all the terminology and all the little things from history that you put in to the backstory, it was that really added to it.
Well, thank you. It was interesting to kind of go back and kind of like, after I wrote it all, I realized I do actually still have the original notes. I've got the original scripts, and so on. They're upstairs in the attic. I remember basically when you write things like this, you do, and as is mentioned in one of the other comic introductions as well, I think for Dances with Demons, Simon Jowett mentions the fact that, of course, the research in those days was all done before the internet. So you did have to go and find a book in your library and hope it was there, or order a book from a bookstore. It was quite fascinating to be able to see what but also I think the things that had influenced me as a kid. I'm going to reference in the introduction the fact that we studied Faustus by Christopher Marlowe. That's the short term, which has, and the character of Mephistopheles in the Christopher Marlowe play is this fallen angel who regrets the fact that he's fallen and actually doesn't want to be tempting people. Now that doesn't appear anywhere within Mortigan, because of course I was dealing with Mephisto, and that gave me another idea, because it's just the other idea is like, okay, so what if that you've got immortals, they're immortal because they've made a deal with the devil. And I do find that, that whole concept of deals with the devil and so on very interesting as well. But what if they all the immortals suddenly start dying? And so why does that happen? And so on. So I think I really enjoyed my comic. I was reading the others today just to see, because I'd not seen the others when they came out as well. There's some interesting stuff in there as well with a Demon Seed and so on. I think the great thing, and the reason why Marvel have brought it out, is of course that this is where an awful lot of anybody who reads comics will recognize a lot of the names, like Liam Sharp, Mark Buckingham, Charlie Adlard, Nick Abadsis, and I'm going to forget people, Paul Johnson. Funnily enough, Paul Johnson, who is the artist on Children of the Voyager was written by Nick Abadsis. Paul and I had done a comic previously for Crisis called Suddenly Last Week, which features small pink fluffy raccoons. It was a really nice short 6-page story, which I'm very proud of, and Paul did an amazing job on, which features a small pink fluffy raccoon, which you can find online. I discovered if you look up Suddenly Last Week
I'm
and
gonna look that up now.
and small pink fluffy raccoons.
Which I normally.
It's a really nice short comic that's illustrated by Paul Johnson and written by me. Some of these guys have really become very big in comics now. Liam's got his own company, Made Fire. Mark has done a lot of work with Neil Gaiman, of course, and Charlie Adlard, I think, if I've got my facts right, is the artist on Walking Dead.
Oh,
Maybe.
really?
The original comic of that. Mm-hmm. So you've got, and forgive me if I've got it wrong, Charlie, and well done me if I've got it right. But really, have done, got on to do amazing stuff.
Yeah,
in comics.
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of the Walking Dead comic book.
Who did the?
I said I'm just a huge fan of the Walking Dead comic, but I'm not positive on the artist.
No, I have to. I'm actually going to be. Let's Walking Dead comic book. We should really look this up.
Yeah.
Comic book. Walking Dead comic book. Ongoing American season. I'm probably totally wrong. No, I'm right. Amazingly. Tony Moore did the original first 6, and then Charlie Adlard did number 7 to the present.
Oh, okay, very good.
So I thought he was. I thought he got involved in was doing The Walking Dead. All these guys, and of course they were very young at the time. I think Liam was only in his. Well, Simon, I think, is in his introduction. He's about 24, and most of them were, fairly fresh out of art school at the time when they were doing the stuff. So it's a really interesting volume, I think, just to see how people, how some of these people started out. So if you're a completist for Walking Dead, Dances with Demons is the one that's done by Charlie Adlard.
Yeah, I want to ask you about because you did use a lot of historic stuff and things from the past. Do you think that adds something to a story, even if people aren't familiar and they don't know about some of the references? Just that it's in there, it adds some realism or adds another dimension to like a fictional story?
That's a very, very good and interesting question. I'm glad you asked me that one, because I was thinking about this. And I'm going to, before I answer it, yes is the short answer to the question, and I think for very good reasons. Are there many immortals in American literature? I was trying to think of some. I mean, you've got Rip Van Winkle who falls asleep. Mm-hmm. You've got ghosts and so on. But I mean, the literature of immortals, I think, tends to be European. Mm-hmm. You've got Dracula. All these are European things. I think it's all. Basically, one of the things I learned very early on as a writer is that if the best cure for writer's block is research. If you are stuck for an idea, go out and read a book. Having that is a non-fiction, mm-hmm. particularly, but fiction can be a good seeding ground for ideas. Seeding ground? I think I made that phrase up. Field. I don't know. So I think it does. I think it adds a layer. It's interesting what you as an American reader, because I was assuming you're not familiar with this stuff. Mm-hmm.
I wasn't familiar with most of the things that you had mentioned.
Well, I mean, I can say, because I don't think I mentioned it even in the introduction. Horsham, which I mentioned, is the town that I grew up in, mm-hmm. Which is where I said more the idea of, the first thing that without giving away spoilers, it's the plague years and what people were doing. I mean, I drew from everywhere, including the Seventh Seal, um, and Ingmar Bergman's film. The whole, all these, they just give a richness.
Hmm.
So it means that okay, well, this is an influence. This image has struck me. Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal of Death playing chess with the knight is just such an iconic image. It really, really struck me, and I think bargain. The idea of a bargain and having to and being able and thinking that you've won when you're playing the devil
Hmm.
is always a misguided concept, which is what Christopher Marlowe's Faustus is about. Funnily enough, is the whole idea of are you familiar? I don't know if you'd be familiar. Are you familiar with the play of Faustus?
I'm not. I'm just I know I've heard of it, but I'm not
You've heard
familiar.
of it.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it was made into a film with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor. And you will probably recognize one of the lines, was this the face that launched a thousand
Hmm.
ships? That comes from Christopher Marlowe's Faustus. These phrases, I love the way these phrases come into our language and just hang around for,
Yeah.
for ages. So I think having this stuff just really helps as a writer, because it helps whenever you're writing, you're building, even if you're writing about reality, it's a fictional world.
Hmm.
Or very much, in some essence, there is some sort of fiction, if you're writing fiction. When you're building a world, and this comes back to The Night Whispered, and when we're talking about Mindless and Fright Night and the death of Evil Ed, is like, you're allowed to twist one thing. I always say, when I sit down to write something, for it to have an emotional impact on people, I feel that it's necessary that they can recognize it. They've got to think, that could be me. I think if it's even, I suppose, one of the things that Star Trek was very good at, the TV series and the
Hmm.
films and so on. It's space opera, or it's set in these weird, and they're visiting weird things. But the things that they're actually dealing with are relationships and greed and jealousy and anger and all
Hmm.
those things. They've got a different setting, and so on. But therefore, you've built a fictional world in which your real people have to operate. I think when by doing research and being able to use things that are real, like the plague, all the stuff that I talk about and the description of the plague, that is all based on the medical facts of how those diseases operate, and the attitudes towards it, and what really went on. Um, those things also are pretty horrific. The then certain things, but also at the time, you just have to kind of use bits of imagination to try and work out, well, what would it be like if you were in this situation?
Hmm. And I really also it's just basically like a page or two, but it's usually if you hear about hell, it's like you're gonna burn in hell and it's just fire. But they uh you really showed it different like forms of like suffering. People being like ripped apart by the winds, and I thought all that stuff was great because it wasn't just the typical that it's just a pit of fire.
Well, I thought I had, and funnily enough, I'm turning around at home, and I'm now looking at a book that is The Divine Comedy, illustrated by Gustave Doré, which is the complete inspiration,
Hmm.
because it's the Circles of Hell from. Funnily enough, it's that, and it's also a. And I'm glad you like that. That's where that was the inspiration. That's where I directly took those things, elements of who the hell wrote the Divine Comedy? it's it's illustrated by Gustave Doré. Give me 2 seconds whilst I reach the
Yeah,
book.
no worries.
That'll be Dante. Yes, that'll be Dante's Divine
Oh,
Comedy.
okay, right.
Look it up online. I'm sure I am lucky enough to have a hardback edition of the Divine Comedy, which is where he does the journey into both hell and heaven,
Mm-hmm.
and mine is probably the most famous illustration version of it by Gustave Doré, which is all the black and white etchings. If you go away and do yourselves a favour, folks, and Google Gustave Doré and Divine Comedy and have a look at some of those etchings, they're just extraordinary. They, yeah, that's where that came from, and it's mixed with a Buddhist Sharihatsu. Is a Japanese he's a Japanese Buddhist monk, and at the time I was studying a lot of Buddhist writings, and I think that it was actually that is why I remembered that last issue, and I'm glad you liked it, because it was I didn't want it to be a travelogue of hell. And on the right, you are going to see the people who are being angry and how they are going to be. Yeah. This is your guide to hell, and stopping off at the third circle. And yeah, so there was something, what was going on, it was obviously very important to the story, as becomes clear. So I'm glad you like that, because I think that's the bit that I found most nerve-wracking. In terms of delivering what I'm supposed to do, which is to entertain people.
Yeah, I actually wasn't even aware that you wrote comic books.
Oh, thank you. Well, it's a long time ago now.
Yeah, I didn't know it was part of your history at all.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely. Again, it's one of those things that I did my usual thing of sheer chutzpah. Basically, when we were making Nightbreed, I had with the money I earned on that, I decided to take myself across to America for the first time. Around about that time, they started publishing the Hellraiser comics. And obviously I knew Clive, and people were telling me about it. I knew Neil Gaiman, because I'd met Neil, because he was around the set on the first movie, and he was obviously a great friend of Clive's, become a good friend of mine. And with his encouragement, I'd also met John Bolton, who's a wonderful artist, amazing artist. And oddly enough, I ended up, as much as writing for comics, I modelled for comics as well. I modelled for John Bolton. I also modelled for Dave McKean. Have you ever come across Dave McKean's book Cages?
No.
That's a really interesting book. It's not, and he says not just because I modelled for it, so I can I know it's me, and you can see it if you with a ponytail, because I had a ponytail in those days, and Barbie Wilde. Barbie Wilde
Really?
modelled the female Cenobite in Hellraiser 2, Hellbound. Modelled for Dave as well, and played the character. It's a really, really, Dave McKean's Cages is a really, really interesting, fascinating book, beautifully illustrated by Dave and written by Dave, which is about creativity and what it is, and it's about an artist who's really struggling about being creative and so on. So yeah, I not only wrote some comics, I modelled for quite a few as well. In fact, you look at some of the story I wrote by Demons to Some, Angels to Other, illustrated by John Bolton as part of the Hellraiser comics. It's very clearly me, in stripped to the waist in one of the scenes, and making love to a woman as well. Come to think of it, I never met her. John John used his artistic license on that one.
Oh,
But yeah. So basically, I went across to America and strolled into Marvel's offices and asked to meet Dan Chichester, who was the editor of Marvel Hellraiser, and could I, no appointment, just me being me, and pitched him a story that I'd written on the plane over, and he bought it.
Huh.
And funnily enough, that one never actually got published because the artist never delivered it.
Uh-huh.
So I'd written the script, but it never got published. That story, and the interesting, stories have lives of their own. They go through different, and a writer, or I am anyway, will quite happily retell the same story if I think it's worth doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's one of the short stories in the Frontier collection, which, if anyone's read, it is the first book, What Monsters Do. They can clearly see that it shares the same influences, and the same core idea, because I just thought it was such a really good idea, and I wanted to revisit the idea. And I didn't know they're going to republish the comic 2 years ago. So that's how I got to write comics. Chutzpah, sheer chutzpah.
That's very cool. Now I have to add model to the list of...
Yes, you have to add model as well. It's a really interesting thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's a really fascinating thing to do, because Dave McKean used to turn up at my flat in Streatham. So it's not just me I recognise in Cages. You can see my, not the internal flat, but the stairs outside my flat in Streatham. Dave really loved it. He thought it was a great setup. So he used to come around about once a month, because the comic was originally published. But it's just been republished. Sorry, I'm bashing the table. So
you were very excited, yes.
I got really excited bashing the table. I realised seeing something Dave mentioned on his Facebook page. I swear Cages is an anniversary edition of some sort, which probably means I'm horribly old if they're publishing anniversary issues of things. Next year is 30 years anniversary of Hellraiser. We're not going to think about that. It's an acting job, because Dave didn't actually show me his story. He would just tell me the story and say, he said, this is the moment, and this is what's happening with your character. And obviously I got to know, because we did this it was a few months. Maybe, I don't know how many issues there were, or how many I'm in. I'm in most of them. And it must be at least half a dozen, I would have thought. And obviously I got to know the character, but never got to see any pages. He would just describe to me what I was looking at and the other characters I was interacting with. And I think it was because I was an actor, I was able to, this is why John and Dave were interested in using me as a model, is because I was an actor rather than a model. That it's bringing that thing, that the characterization and being in the moment and being able to imagine the other people around you, and so this is what my thought process is, this is what my intention or desire is at a particular moment.
I don't think that's something a lot of people think, it even exists, like a model for people to do a comic book.
Well, it is fascinating, because I was reading the intro. I'm assuming people do it now.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, artists have always used models for paintings. Mm-hmm. If you think about, it can't all just come out of their imagination. John Bolton, as I've been talking about, you can recognize that most of his family, his kids, his wife, in a lot of his comics, because obviously they were there. They take reference photographs and then paint from the reference photograph. It's tremendously helpful, if you're particularly with John, because John paints all his pages. When I say paint, I mean acrylic, oil color. Mm-hmm. Every page is a work of art. Dave, uses a different style, but it's the same thing. He needs to know where the light's falling. And what I'm saying is that John has a very more photorealistic style than comparing to Dave's Cages. Dave does do photorealism, obviously, in some of his other work. It's very natural, I think, if you're thinking about it. I was talking to Graham Humphreys, who is well known for his posters and video covers and DVDs and so on. And he was saying, the way and what he does is he melds all these characters together, and he of course just works from the stills that the production company gives for a particular film. So I guess you don't think about it, particularly thinking about Spider-Man and so on.
Right.
It's going to be very difficult to actually,
Right.
there,
From this
there,
rope, and
yeah, it's really difficult to get your mate hanging from from a thin web off the side of a building and being athletic at the same time. But of course, then it's just a question of building up. The way the artists work is you build up the basic forms. There's a wonderful book which was referenced recently by a gentleman called Brian Moore, called Drawing the Marvel Way, which is really recommended just for any artist if you want to draw figures, because they really do break down how the different relationships in the face between the distance between the eyes. What was it Brian was saying? That basically the width of the nose is the width of one of your eyes, generally speaking. At the bridge of your nose, the distance between your two eyes is the width of one of your eyes. And I thought, I didn't know that. That's brilliant. That's really fascinating.
Yeah, I know when every year Annabelle and I go and do a stone carving in the Catskills, and she's very artistic. I'm not. And but that was something, because I was doing a Frankenstein face, and she was telling me that I think that was one of the things she told me was the nose was the same as the eye, and I forget now, but it was like halfway down you put the ears, and it's a lot of things that didn't seem right just if you would hear it, but it came out right when you were doing it.
Yeah, no, I think it is very interesting if you having that basic understanding of form and physique, to be able to do portraits. And so my mum used to paint portraits. I've got a beautiful portrait by my mother of my grandmother. It's unfinished, but it's very recognizably my grandmother. I know, and I think it's a fascinating thing that people can do things like that, because I just love the fact that people would just sit there. They start with a blank piece of paper. There's a gentleman called Rufus Dayglow, who's a really, really nice guy I met a couple of years ago, and we were on Eurostar to go and do a convention. We'd never met before. And then we suddenly realized we were going to the same place, and he was asking about why, and he was saying, he draws Tank Girl, the Tank Girl comic, and he's also drawn Judge Dredd, etc. And there was a group of drunken men basically who kind of chatting, saying, "Oh, really? You're a comic artist?" And within 20 minutes, Rufus had done this beautiful caricature of one of the guys being arrested by Judge Dredd for drinking on the Eurostar. I'm gobsmacked by talent like that. I think it's just you kind of, as a writer, you kind of feel very jealous, because you think, well, it's so visible how talented you are. Somebody can just look at it and go, wow, that's amazing. If you're a writer, it's just words on pages. It's somebody has to sit down. You think, do you know what I went through? And of course, what artists go through to be able, they don't, they're not born grasping a pencil and able to do things like that. They go to school and they practice year on year on year to be able to do things like that. But it's kind of like, really wish I could draw, because I just think it's an amazing thing to be able to do.
Just real quick, when you mentioned Brian Moore, is that the guy who does the bus?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, awesome. Yeah.
Have you had him on the show?
No, we were going to have him on to talk about the Bram Stoker bust, but we met him last year when at the unveiling of the Poe bust in Boston.
Oh, right.
Yeah, he's really cool guy, and he's very, very talented.
A very, very talented. He came on the show and he showed us the reference material that he had for Bram Stoker, and of course, it's. If you think about it, there aren't that many photographs of the sides of people's heads or the back of their head. So when he was doing the Poe bust and the H.P. Lovecraft bust and so on, you have to kind of do a lot of joining up the dots. But it was a really fascinating process to see how he managed to create those things. So yeah, and he's lovely, really fascinating. He was the man who was mentioning to me drawing comics the Marvel way.
Mm-hmm.
Is a really good. If you do want to learn to draw, apparently that's the book to get. Not necessarily the part work that they're publishing in the UK, I suspect, because that's always part works. Do you have part works in America?
If we do, I'm not familiar with it.
Oh, well, it's part works are where you get a magazine that's published each week, and you can build a wooden
Oh,
model
I see.
of HMS Victory or something,
Mm-hmm.
of a ship, a galleon, a pirate ship or something like that. And you look at these things and you realize it's going to take you a year, and it'll probably cost you over £200, $400 or $500 to build these things. And they do them. There's a big thing in this country. Every January, there's an awful lot of adverts on TV for part works. And yeah, and they're redoing drawing comics the Marvel way as a part work where you get I guess I have no idea how many pages, 16, 20 pages of a book, but it comes with pencils and rulers, and they explain. So the idea is basically you're learning like you would at a night class.
Mm-hmm.
You get a lesson every week, basically, on how to build this thing with some background and so on. But it was I swear it was a book originally. Whether or not it's still available or not, I don't know. But it would be a very good thing to do.
Yeah, it was very cool. Though. It was Halloween last year. I think it was last year at the or maybe the year before. Actually, it was the year before. Edgar Allan Poe bust, and Brian was there, and Graham Humphreys was there as well.
Isn't he a lovely man?
Yes, yes.
We're both. I've not actually met Brian in the flesh, though I hope to at some stage. But Graham's lovely. He's a really, really cool guy.
Yeah, his artwork is amazing, and it's very distinct. If you see, since I found out who he was, anytime you see something, you know right away if it's his.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's just a fascinating. Again, as I was alluding to earlier on, that obviously Graham works from stills from the movie and does these wonderful. Effectively, does a collage. It's not a collage because that implies that he's cutting things out and pasting them together,
Right.
To get the final effect. Well, I think he does kind of done rough layouts to show to people who are obviously hiring him to do the job. But he actually just sits down and paints and draws. I was at Celluloid Screams in Sheffield, which is a film festival, it's Halloween last year, and Graham was there as well. Whereas I was going into the cinema and watching films, Graham was painting a poster. And it's just beautifully intricate and detailed work with very fine brushwork and so on.
Mm-hmm. It's very very unique use of colors.
Yes, very. I think the phrase psychedelic might apply, but it's. I mean, he does amazing stuff. I got one of it. Funny enough, I've got a flyer for his book, Drawing Blood, which if I win the lotto, I will probably be able to buy. $200 or $300. It's beautiful. I've seen copies of it. It's just think, yeah, I can understand why you're charging. Why the publisher, not Graham. It's not Graham who's setting the price. It's amazing, absolutely amazing work.
Well, how do people get Marvel Frontier Comics to graphic?
It's on Amazon, Amazon.com. You can get it all through the normal comic suppliers. It's in comics. It's only been out about a month or so. But it's still available from Amazon.com, as far as I'm aware. And it's called Marvel Frontier Comics, the complete collection.
Yeah, and honestly, I read yours. Obviously the interview, and I absolutely loved it. And it makes me want to. I'm gonna finish the rest of the book to read all of them. And again, it wasn't just because you're on. I really enjoyed reading it.
Oh, good. Thank you. Well, I've got a couple of. I think you probably read there's a short story at the very back of the book that I wrote as well. I thought, hang on, how come I'm topping and tailing this book? That's very lucky. I like that. Yeah, there's a really interesting, and it's very interesting to see the different styles as well, because not just in the different styles of writing, but the different styles of artwork as well. They are very, very different. And it is particularly for anybody who's familiar with these artists and these creators now, if you want to go back and see their very, very early work and compare it, I think it must be fascinating to compare it to the work that they're producing now.
Yeah, you'd mentioned The Watchmen and kind of like the start of the graphic novel. Are you a fan of The Watchmen?
I am. Yes, I remember. You see, I think somewhere in my house I should have a copy of The Watchmen signed by Alan Moore.
Oh wow.
I've certainly met him at signings, and Dave Gibbons, who did the artwork. I met Dave. Actually, give me 2 seconds, Neil. I may
Yeah,
be
no
able
problem.
to.
But honestly, after I read Watchmen, which I didn't read till probably within the last 10 years, that made me seek out other Alan Moore work, and just all his stuff's amazing.
To Nicholas, Dave Gibbons. To Nicholas, best, Alan Moore, Watchmen. So that's the original. Yes, I knew. I thought I'd got the original. I think it's. I just love. I don't read comics now. I don't have the time and there's just too many of them, and I know I'm missing out. But I think one of the reasons why I find the comic art form absolutely fascinating, because it is so much more than just storyboards for a movie. Though if you want to see possibly the most filmic comic, and that's Killing Joke.
Yes, yeah, that's because I think it was after I saw Sin City, which got me interested in graphic novels because I like Sin City so much. I got the graphic novels, and I started collecting other ones, and that was one I picked up, and that's just the masterpiece, really.
Yeah, I'm not actually. Parts of the. I've seen parts of the movie. I don't think I've ever sat down and watched the whole of Sin City. Probably because it's going to be too violent for me.
It is, but it is very comic booky. It's very comic book violence.
Yeah,
the
no,
blood is
yes,
white.
and
Yeah.
It was one of the great joys and the strengths of it. I love that lighting and what they do, and the effects. I'm a tremendous admirer for that. I probably should just sit down and watch it sometime.
Yeah, The Killing Joke, though, like I said, that's just one of the best graphic novels or comic books, whatever you say, ever made.
Oh yeah, no, and I think it's just that it's the way you actually have crossfades within one panel, where you're seeing Joker's present and his background. I mean, the first 2-3 pages, I think there's one caption. It's just panel after panel after panel. It's like, it's the real storytelling. It's like a silent movie. And I'm talking to you about it now, and I'm picturing all these different panels and the just the moments of real storytelling. Even from actually as you open up the front cover, and I assume this is still true of later editions, certainly in the first one, it's rain drops falling, and it's the circles of the water expanding to establish the rain, and that's on the inside front cover, and then you get the Batmobile turning up, and it's if you happen to know what it is you're reading, I guess, if you know who Batman and Joker are, you know exactly what's going on. I really want to find it. I think it's downstairs somewhere now. I really want to pick it up and sit down and sit down and read it again now, because I've got myself all excited by it again, and just think it's brilliant. And the scene um, when it first came out, shocked everybody at the time, because nobody had really done that before. It was just kind of like, what? And you turn the page, you just think, oh my God. It's extraordinary storytelling. Really is extraordinary storytelling.
And it's a combination of everything, because it's the artwork and the story itself.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really is that thing of. But I think that's what story. Again, coming back to what we were talking about, your first question is like, how do I see these things? It's all about storytelling.
Mm-hmm.
I love the fact that now when they look at cave paintings, they think, when you look at these things, an argument could be made that this is our ancient ancestors telling stories and recording stories to pass on to generation, to pass on to other family members. The idea that you have, and this is the thing about humanity, is that we have the tremendous urge to tell our story, because our personal story, is probably the most important story that we ever have. The story of our lives. That we want that recorded. I am really fortunate that my story isn't, and my stories are told and listened to and heard by lots of different people. And that's one of the great joys of working in the profession that I work in. There is that. Have you ever heard of a piece? It's an American piece called Desiderata.
No.
It's one of the things that came out in the 1970s. It's worth Desiderata, Desiderata. We can look it up afterwards. Check it. Desiderata has it's one of those defining pieces. It's basically about how to live. It starts, go placidly amid the noise and haste, and remember what peace there may be in silence. As far as possible, be in good terms with all. I'm misquoting now, but one of the lines is, listen to the dull and the ignorant, for they too have their stories. And that's what makes us human. That's what makes us, the fact that we have our story. We all want our story to be understood by the people who are important to us, by our loved ones. And we want our stories to go down through the ages. That's why I think there are so many archetypal stories. There are some. This is why we are still fascinated by the Greek myths and legends, and the Roman versions of them, and the Japanese versions of them. In fact, if you ever come, there's a young lady called Pablo, which confused me, who I've just recently hooked up with on Facebook, who has done a short film called Shi, SHI, which is based on a Japanese folk tale. So she's an English. I haven't spoken to her, but I believe she's English and living in, though with the name Pablo, I'm not quite sure, but she's living in Japan. And she's making these short, and what she wants to do is to make short films based on Japanese myths and legends, which I find fascinating.
Yeah.
And you find all these archetypes throughout the world, these very common themes about the hero's journey and so on, and conflict makes drama, etc. So I think to kind of wind this interview down, as I like to do, come to the very beginning, because we all do eventually. We come from non-existence to existence to non-existence. this urge to tell stories, the urge to communicate, as one of my drama tutors said to me, it's just inherent in all of us. And that's what we do. And I'm just in the fortunate position that I kind of have the ability to go, ooh, a thing. I want to tell this story. I've got this story in my mind, and I've got to tell it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and we all do. If you, this is how Facebook exists. We're sharing, you know, the stories that get the most impact and the ones that get shared the most, the videos that get shared the most, are the ones that kind of have a story.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, about, you know, something that's relevant to us.
Mm-hmm. It's very well put, and yeah, it's exactly like you said. That's why so many of the archetypes and basic storytelling, yeah, everything will evolve, but the basic storytelling of a story is timeless.
Yes, I think so. And it's not. I've spoken to a couple of friends recently who are telling me about the film that they were about to get involved with, and I said, "Oh, that's like," and you could see the disappointment in their face when you thought, "Oh, I just kind of accused them of stealing. I've just
Right.
told them their film isn't new," and I'm thinking, "No, that's not what I'm saying,"
Mm-hmm.
because every time I tell a story, it may be an old story. It's going to be different because what I bring to it is my experience as Nick Vence, because that is what is totally unique. My view of my world, of the world, is totally unique to me, because it's based on my experiences. You know, the loves, the hurts, the joys, the failures, the successes. Um, and I just think, you know, it's something you do learn earlier on. Is like, you know, the old adage is there's no such thing as a new story. Well, that's true and not true, of course. You know, we all love novelty, and the world does change, and technology changes, and experience changes. There are certain things that don't change. That's human stupidity seems to be one of them.
Uh-huh.
Every time I look at the world and turn the news on. But finding the new solutions and finding the new ways of doing things and finding the ways that you reach out to people, is to do with stories, as far as I can see.
Well, it's always a pleasure to have you here, Nicholas. No, it was. I don't know. I can't top that, so I think it's a very fitting.
Well, thank you very much. And what I love about talking to you, Neil, is you just allow me to go on and pontificate. I can't speak now. But that's been really interesting. And thank you very much indeed for having me on the show and allowing me to kind of talk about these things, because it is always fun to talk to you. And do give my love to Annabelle.
Yes. Yes.
And hopefully we'll hook up again soon.
Yeah, oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, she's right now she's helping out in the Bernie Sanders campaign, and so she wanted to devote all her time and energy to that. So
I personally, you know, your American politics is a mystery to me. Particularly some of the people I see standing. Bernie Sanders seems a fairly sound guy as far as I'm concerned, so I think that's an important thing that she's doing. And certainly he's a lot better than an alternative.
yeah, yeah.
And trust me, I'm not casting stones at the American people, because exactly, you know, and then actually, you know, that is one of the reasons for Trump's success, because he tells the story that people want to hear.
That's very true. It says a lot. It's you can't deny the man's charismatic. Lots of not necessarily great people have been charismatic, and he says things that certain people want to hear.
Yeah, because it's basically, you know, it's the reason why politicians like Trump succeed is because he plays on people's fears.
Mm-hmm.
He, at the same time as telling people they're great, and we're going to make this country great again, he's playing to their most basic fears, and saying, you know, it's not your fault. Don't, you know, it's not really your responsibility. It's them. It's their fault. And as long as we can always blame that, and it's true in our personal lives as it is in politics, we're all happy if we can blame them and saying, it's not my fault.
Which,
Um,
unfortunately, is also another timeless thing throughout history.
yeah, yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. Which is, it's why Socrates got. You go back to the time of Socrates and how he was a man who was executed after a democratic vote. Um, it, yeah. The people have spoken, the bastards. But anyway, I do actually have. Speaking of stories, I have a story. I know that there is somebody curled up in the other room who will want to have his nighttime perambulation.
Yes,
I'm talking about the dog, by the way, not Craig. Craig's away at the moment. Um,
and you have to pamper him because he's the star of your film.
He's the star of my film.
Right.
I do have to pamper him. Yeah, he won't be going into any premieres because basically he just he would just head for the popcorn and eat it all. If Bertie got anywhere close, Bertie has a thing about food. He believes that everything is food. Yeah. So anyway, mate, thank you so very much indeed for coming on for letting me come on your show. I've
Oh,
enjoyed this.
it's always a pleasure. Anytime, you're always welcome.
Thank you very much indeed.
Hi, this is Doug Bradley, Pinhead from the Hellraiser movies, and you are listening to Without Your Head. And you'd better keep listening to Without Your Head, or you will not only be without your head, you will be without your soul, because I will tear it apart.